Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be looking at the Minolta 100mm F2.8 Macro lens. Just go on to some of the key specifications now. This is a 1:1 macro lens, so you get life-size reproduction. Just show you over the body controls, we do have a focus limit switch, and next to that there is also a focus hold button. Depending on the camera that you're using, you can assign that for different functions. It's quite a thick focusing ring on this. You can see the traditional Minolta style ones, the later design. It's quite comfortable, provides a decent grip. You can see the markings on the lens there. It shows you the magnification that you're at. Although most of the lens is made out of plastic, the barrel, that is actually metal. Just having a look inside the lens now at the aperture blades, they are curved, so we should be getting some quite nice defocused effects with this. I'll talk about that a bit later on. You can see when I'm extending it out to focus closer how the elements on the inside are moving forwards. This has a floating element design, and it's the same design from the original mid-80s. What they did with this D lens is they added an automatic clutch. This makes it quite different from something like the Tamron 90mm, which had a push-pull mechanism for the auto and manual focus control. This has 8 contacts on the back. It's a D-type lens, so you have the distance encoder. It is screw driven from the body. This was one of those lenses that was never updated to an in-lens motor. This is the Bayonet lens hood. Sometimes you'll see it with the LB 1076, and sometimes you will see it with the 100mm Macro printed on it. Despite being plastic, everything does feel very nicely made. They're good quality plastics that Minolta tended to use with their later lenses. This is a macro lens, so you don't get particularly fast focus speeds, but I'll show you some examples of other types of photography that I've done with this lens. Just to show you the differences with the earlier versions, this one is the original. That was the one released in the mid-80s. In the 90s they came out with a restyled one that added the focus hold button there on the side, and the Sony version that is essentially identical to the Minolta, just some physical cosmetic differences. A couple of quick tests now just to give you an idea on the optical performance. You'll be able to see that there is some vignetting with this on a full frame camera. That tends to disappear around about f5.6, though it's greatly reduced at f4. Here's another example with some sky in the shots. You can see that the darkening there on the corners wide open. It's fairly easy to correct. I don't find it a huge problem myself, real world shooting. Do a few resolution shots now just to give you an idea of the optical performance. Wide open, this lens is quite good at f2.8. There's a slight improvement, but not much at all. Once you start to stop it down, it's quite a sharp lens wide open. We'll have a quick look at the corners now. It's not too bad wide open. In the corner there you can see there is some darkening. It's not quite sharp, but it does pick up once you start to stop down. Around about f5.6 it gets quite good across the frame. I don't see much difference between f5.6 and f8. Let's have a look at the chromatic aberration. You can see there's a fair amount of that purple fringing when it's wide open in high contrast situations. It's not too hard to correct in software, but you will find you can get some of that discoloration, such as the green cyan effect in different focal planes. That's a bit more difficult to remove. Lens flare can be an issue depending at the angles you're at. You can see there's a bit of a blob there, although it's not too bad. I've definitely seen worse. Prime lenses are usually pretty good on distortion. There's a very slight amount of pin cushion on this lens. Not really going to notice that in real world shooting. Moving on to the outer focus areas and the quality of that. Generally it's quite similar to the Tamron 90mm. In most cases you get very nice smooth backgrounds and outer focus areas with this lens. There are a few exceptions to that, which I'll show you a bit later on. The minimum focus on this is 35 centimeters, and that can be useful if you are doing things like insect macro photography, anything that moves. That means to say you have a bit of working distance between you and the subject. You'll find you will need to stop the lens down a fair amount, particularly at 1:1, to try and get more depth of field, although you could do some focus stacking manually yourself. At the 1:1 life-size reproduction, you're capturing an area almost exactly the same as an SD card. Of course, you have different options with focal lengths with these macro lenses. Typically, I tend to go for the slightly longer focal length. The reason for that is, aside from using it for macro, I ended up using this lens for quite a few other things, not just macro photography. It works quite well as an alternative to carrying, say, something like a 70-200, a much heavier lens, where you want a faster telephoto, and I've used it on full frame and APS-C as a sort of candid type lens. Gives me a bit more distance between me and the subject. In most cases, the out of focus effect in the background was very pleasing. At longer distances, it can get a little bit on the edgy side, such as the example I'm showing you here. Saying that, I do think it was slightly better at longer distances than the Tamron 90mm. Being a macro lens, I didn't expect this to do particularly well with moving subjects, and I found that it did quite well on the A99. I used it for some of the marathon shots that I did, and do make sure that you put the focus limiter on. That will prevent it from racking through the full focus range, which could be a problem. Obviously that will slow things down significantly. And you can see with examples, I'm using this at f2.8 a lot of the time, and there's plenty of detail there. You really won't be unhappy shooting with this lens wide open. Just for fun, I did do a quick comparison with the Tamron 90mm macro lens. What I found is that the Minolta is very slightly sharper in the center at f2.8, wide open. At the corners, the Tamron was slightly better, but this is only at extreme pixel peeping. You would never notice the difference between these lenses at normal print sizes or viewing distances. Aside from being a very competent macro lens, I do like the focal length for things like portraits and candid photography. If you've got any thoughts on this lens or any questions, do drop a comment down below for me, and as usual, thanks for watching.